The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite like bullets against armor. Inside, Delaney Roth pressed her trembling hands against the mahogany desk, her wedding ring, now 2 sizes too large, sliding down her bony finger. Across from her sat Jin-Woo Park, the most feared man in Seoul's underground empire, his ink-black eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have terrified her. Instead, she leaned forward, her hollow cheeks flushed with something that looked dangerously close to desperation, and whispered 3 words that stopped his world. "Don't stop. Please." Jin-Woo's hand, which had been reaching for the contract that would dissolve their arrangement, froze midair. The city lights behind him blurred through the storm, casting shadows across his perfectly tailored suit. He'd built an empire on reading people, on knowing when they were lying, when they were afraid, when they were broken. But the woman before him, this ghost of elegance wrapped in a dress that hung off her frame like a funeral shroud, was something he'd never encountered. She wasn't supposed to beg. She was supposed to take the money and disappear. "Mrs. Roth," he began, his voice carrying the careful control of a man who'd learned to weaponize silence. "You don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly." Delaney's laugh was brittle, sharp enough to cut. "You think I'm here because I'm grieving. You think this is about my dead husband's debts. You think you know my story." She pushed herself up from the chair, swaying slightly, her emerald eyes blazing with a fever that had nothing to do with illness. "You don't know anything. Someone once told me these stories would never matter, that no one would listen. If you're here right now, help me prove them wrong. Subscribe, because stories like this deserve a voice." 3 months earlier, Delaney Roth had been a different woman. Not in appearance, she'd always been beautiful, with that rare combination of classical features and modern edge that made people stop and stare. But 3 months ago, she'd smiled. She'd eaten. She'd believed that the man she'd married was exactly who he claimed to be, Nathaniel Roth, brilliant tech entrepreneur, philanthropist, the kind of husband who brought her coffee in bed and slow danced with her in their kitchen at midnight. 3 months ago, she hadn't known that Nathaniel's company was a shell, that his philanthropy was money laundering, that the men who came to their home for dinner parties were buying and selling more than stocks and bonds. 3 months ago, she hadn't stood in a morgue, identifying what remained of her husband after his car went off Serpent's Bend, the cliff road that everyone knew was dangerous, but no one had ever actually fallen from. Not accidentally. The detective had asked her the standard questions with a face that suggested he already knew the answers. "Did your husband have any enemies, Mrs. Roth?" "Yes." "Was he involved in anything unusual?" "Everything." "Is there anyone who might have wanted to harm him?" "Everyone." But Delaney had played the part she was supposed to play, the devastated widow, too grief-stricken to process, too fragile to suspect. She'd worn black to the funeral where exactly 7 people showed up. She'd nodded through meetings with lawyers who explained, with barely concealed satisfaction, that Nathaniel had left her nothing but debt, the kind of debt that came with quiet men in expensive cars who appeared at her door with offers that weren't really offers. That's how she'd met Jin-Woo Park. He'd arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd been carved from stone. Unlike the others who'd come collecting, Jin-Woo had waited for an invitation before entering her home. He'd removed his shoes at the door, a gesture so unexpectedly respectful it had almost made her laugh. And when he'd sat across from her in the living room that still smelled faintly of Nathaniel's cologne, he looked at her not like a debtor, but like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Your husband owed my organization $3 million, Jin-Woo had said, his English perfect, but touched with an accent that turned certain words into music. I have the documentation if you'd like to review it." Delaney had reviewed it. All of it. Every forged signature, every fake transaction, every careful lie that Nathaniel had constructed. Her husband hadn't just been a criminal. He'd been an artist of deception, painting a masterpiece of fraud with her as the unwitting canvas. I don't have $3 million, she'd told Jin-Woo, surprised by how steady her voice remained. I don't have $3,000. The house is mortgaged. The cars are leased. Even my wedding ring is. She'd stopped, looking down at the princess-cut diamond that suddenly felt like a shackle. I don't have anything. Jin-Woo had studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he'd done something that changed everything. He'd smiled. Not the predatory smile of a man closing in on prey, but something softer, almost sad. Then we have a problem, Mrs. Roth. Because in my world, debts don't die with the debtor. Now, standing in his penthouse as rain battered the windows, Delaney understood that Jin-Woo had expected her to crumble under the weight of that problem. He'd expected tears, pleas for mercy, maybe even offers she'd regret. Instead, she'd surprised him. She'd proposed a solution. "I'll work for you," she'd said during that first meeting, the words coming out before she'd fully formed the thought. "Whatever you need." I was Nathaniel's partner in his company. I know how to manage operations, handle logistics, interface with clients. I speak 4 languages. I have a degree in international business. I'm desperate. Jin-Woo had finished her sentence with clinical precision. Which makes you unreliable. No. Delaney had leaned forward, channeling every ounce of conviction she possessed. It makes me motivated. I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering a trade. My skills, my time, my complete discretion, in exchange for clearing Nathaniel's debt. Consider it a 5-year contract. She'd watched something shift in Jin-Woo's eyes, a flicker of interest, maybe respect. 5 years of your life for $3 million. That's a terrible exchange rate, Mrs. Roth. It's Delaney, she'd corrected. And it's not just my life. It's my expertise. It's access to Nathaniel's network, his files, everyone he screwed over, and everyone he worked with. You want your money back? I can help you get it. You want to know who else he was playing? I can find out. She'd paused, letting the offer sink in. Unless you'd prefer to just kill me now and write off the loss. Jin-Woo had laughed at that, a real laugh, rich and unexpected. You know, Delaney Roth, you're either very brave or very stupid. I'm very alive, she'd replied. And I'd like to stay that way. He'd given her a week to prove her worth. 7 days to show she was more valuable alive than dead, more useful than disposable. Delaney had spent those 7 days systematically dismantling every digital trace of Nathaniel's operation, cross-referencing his contacts, uncovering accounts he'd hidden even from his partners. She'd worked 20-hour days, fueled by rage and black coffee, sleeping in tower bursts on the couch because the bed still smelled like him. By day 6, she'd recovered $1 million from accounts Nathaniel had squirreled away in the Cayman Islands. By day 7, she'd identified 3 of Nathaniel's associates who were planning to flee the country with money that belonged to various criminal organizations, including Jin-Woo's. When she'd presented her findings, Jin-Woo had studied the documents for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked up at her, really looked at her, and said, "You're not eating." The observation had been so unexpected, so jarringly personal after a week of pure business, that Delaney had actually stumbled over her response. I'm working." "You're dying," Jin-Woo had corrected, his tone matter of fact. "Slowly, but dying nonetheless. I can see it. You've lost at least 15 pounds since the funeral. Your hands shake. Your eyes have that hollow look of someone who's stopped caring about tomorrow." He'd stood, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. "I don't invest in assets that are destroying themselves." "Then fire me," Delaney had shot back, anger flaring hot and bright. "Send your collectors. Do whatever it is you people do. But don't stand there and pretend you care about. I don't. Jin-Woo had cut her off cleanly. I care about returns on investment. And you, Delaney Roth, are potentially a very good investment. But not if you're dead in 6 months from grief-induced starvation. He'd hired her after that, with one condition. She had to eat 1 meal per day in his presence. So I can monitor my investment, he'd explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. Consider it a performance metric. For 2 months, they'd maintained this bizarre arrangement. Delaney would work from a secure office in one of Jin-Woo's legitimate businesses, a consulting firm that actually did consulting, along with other things, and every evening at 7, they'd share a meal. Sometimes it was takeout from the Thai place on 5th Street. Sometimes it was elaborate dishes prepared by Jin-Woo's personal chef. Always, it was awkward, tense, and oddly intimate. They talked about everything except the obvious. Jin-Woo told her about growing up in Busan, about the uncle who'd raised him after his parents died, about the choice between law school and the family business, and how he'd chosen both, in his own way. Delaney told him about her childhood in Vermont, about the scholarship to Columbia that had changed her life, about the dreams she'd had before Nathaniel had twisted them into nightmares. They didn't talk about why she'd stopped eating or why he cared. And Delaney had started to heal. Not because she'd forgiven Nathaniel or herself or the universe for the cruelty of it all, but because somewhere between the spring rolls and the corporate espionage, between the kimchi and the money laundering investigations, she'd found a purpose that wasn't drowning. But then, 3 days ago, everything had changed again. Delaney had been going through another set of Nathaniel's encrypted files when she'd found it, a video, dated 2 weeks before his death. In it, Nathaniel sat at his desk, looking directly at the camera, directly at her, across time and death, and smiled. "Hello, darling," his recorded voice had said, and Delaney's blood had turned to ice. "If you're watching this, it means I'm dead. It also means you've found my insurance policy." For the next 47 minutes, Nathaniel had laid out everything. The truth about his death, not an accident, but a hit ordered by someone in Jin-Woo's organization, someone who'd suspected Nathaniel was skimming. The truth about the debt, inflated, falsified, a convenient excuse to control his assets. And the truth about Jin-Woo Park himself. "He's not what you think, Delaney," Nathaniel had said, his smile never wavering. "He's worse. Everything he's told you, every kindness, every carefully constructed moment, it's a game. And you, my love, are the prize." The video had ended with coordinates, account numbers, and a final message. "I'm sorry for everything. But I'm not sorry for giving you the tools to destroy him. Use them. Burn it all down." Delaney had sat in the dark of her office for hours after the video ended, Nathaniel's words echoing in her head. She could have gone to the police. She could have run. She could have taken the information Nathaniel had left her and disappeared into whatever life people started when they stopped being themselves. Instead, she'd gone to Jin-Woo's penthouse. She'd demanded the truth. And now, with rain hammering against the windows and Jin-Woo's hand still frozen over the contract that would end their arrangement, Delaney waited for him to answer the question she'd actually asked beneath all her bravado. "Was any of it real?" she whispered. "The meals. The conversations. The way you look at me like I'm something more than a debt you're collecting. Was any of it real, or was Nathaniel right about you?" Jin-Woo slowly lowered his hand, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to pull at the very air between them. "Your husband," he said carefully, "was a liar and a thief. But he was also, in his own twisted way, a genius at understanding people. So when you ask me if any of it was real..." He paused, standing up to face her fully. "You need to be prepared for the answer. Because once I tell you the truth, Delaney Roth, everything changes. Everything. The lights of Seoul glittered behind him, a million stories unfolding in the rain. Somewhere in that vast city, people were living and dying, loving and betraying, all of them believing they understood their own narratives. Delaney took a breath that hurt her ribs, her hollow frame a testament to grief and rage and something she didn't have a name for yet. Tell me. Jin-Woo reached into his jacket, and for one terrible moment, Delaney thought he might pull out a gun. Instead, he extracted a photograph, creased, faded, clearly carried for a long time. He held it out to her. In the photo, a younger Jin-Woo stood beside a beautiful woman with Delaney's exact shade of auburn hair, her exact smile. Her name was Soo-yoon, Jin-Woo said quietly. And your husband killed her 3 years ago. The world tilted. Delaney's fingers trembled as she took the photograph, seeing the woman's face, seeing the date stamped in the corner, 3 years before she'd even met Nathaniel. So you tell me, Delaney, Jin-Woo continued, his voice soft as a blade. Was any of it real? Or have we both been players in a dead man's game? Before she could answer, the penthouse door exploded inward, and men in tactical gear flooded the room, their weapons trained on both of them. And the man who walked in behind them, casual as a Sunday morning, made Delaney's heart stop entirely. Because he was supposed to be dead. Because he was her husband. Because Nathaniel Roth was smiling at her like he'd just won a game she hadn't even known they were playing. Hello, darling, he said, echoing the video, his voice real and alive and impossible. Surprise. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had intensified, each drop against the penthouse windows sounding like applause for a performance Delaney hadn't auditioned for. She stood frozen, the photograph of Soo-yoon still clutched in her fingers, her brain unable to process the contradiction standing in her doorway. Nathaniel Roth looked exactly as she remembered, sandy hair perfectly styled, blue eyes bright with intelligence, that slight dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. He wore a charcoal suit she'd never seen before, expensive but understated, the kind of thing he'd always favored. The only difference was the beard, neatly trimmed, giving him a distinguished air that somehow made him look more like a stranger than a ghost. You're dead. Delaney's voice came out as barely a whisper, the words feeling ridiculous even as she spoke them. I identified your body. I buried you. Nathaniel's smile widened, that familiar expression that used to make her feel cherished and now made her feel like she was falling. You buried someone, darling. But it wasn't me. He glanced at Jin-Woo, who stood utterly still beside Delaney, his expression transformed into something carved from ice. Though I'll admit, the dental work was expensive. Worth it, though, to see Park's face right now. One of the tactical team members, a woman with silver hair pulled back, so tight it must have hurt, stepped forward. Mr. Roth, where would you like them? Them. Nathaniel laughed, the sound easy and warm and completely wrong. Oh, Lucia, you misunderstand. I only need Jin-Woo secured. Delaney's going to come with me willingly. Aren't you, sweetheart? The endearment hit like a physical blow. Delaney had heard it 1,000 times before, wrapped in morning coffee and goodnight kisses, and now it felt like poison. I'm not going anywhere with you. No? Nathaniel tilted his head, studying her with the focus he usually reserved for complex problems. Not even to save his life? He nodded toward Jin-Woo. Because that's the choice, Delaney. You come with me right now, no fuss, no drama, and Park lives to run his empire another day. You stay, you fight, you make this difficult. He made a regretful sound. Well, let's just say I've invested considerable resources into this moment. I'd hate to see them wasted. Jin-Woo spoke for the first time since Nathaniel's entrance, his voice carrying a deadly calm. She's not going anywhere with you, Roth. Oh, but she is. Nathaniel crossed to the bar, helping himself to Jin-Woo's very expensive scotch with the ease of a man who owned the place. Because despite everything, despite the fake death, the debt, the lies, my wife loves me. Don't you, Delaney? The question hung in the air like smoke. Delaney felt Jin-Woo's eyes on her, felt the weight of everyone in the room waiting for her answer. 3 months ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. 3 months ago, she would have meant it. Now, standing in the wreckage of every truth she'd thought she knew, Delaney realized something that felt like glass breaking inside her chest. I don't even know who you are. Nathaniel's smile faltered, just for a moment, barely a flicker, but Delaney caught it. She'd spent 5 years learning to read his expressions, to anticipate his moods, to navigate the man she'd thought was her partner. That micro-expression told her something crucial. He'd expected her to still be his, completely and without question. He'd miscalculated. I'm your husband, Nathaniel said, recovering quickly. The man who chose you out of everyone in the world. The man who built a life with you. The man who faked his death and left me to pay his debts, Delaney countered, her voice growing stronger. The man who apparently killed Jin-Woo's. She glanced at the photograph still in her hand. Who is she to you? This last question was directed at Jin-Woo. Before Jin-Woo could answer, Nathaniel laughed again, darker this time. Oh, this is rich. He didn't tell you? Of course he didn't. Let me fill in the blanks, darling. Seoul Park wasn't just anyone to our friend Jin-Woo here. She was his wife. The word landed like a bomb. Wife. Delaney looked at Jin-Woo, searching his face for confirmation, denial, anything. He met her gaze steadily, and in his eyes, she saw a pain so profound it made her own grief look shallow. And I didn't kill her, Nathaniel continued, swirling his scotch. Technically. I mean, I gave the order, but I wasn't the one who rigged her car. Professional courtesy and all that. Delaney's stomach turned. Why? Business, Nathaniel said simply, as if that explained everything. Seoul had information I needed. She wouldn't sell it. So I took it, and unfortunately, she became a liability. These things happen in our world. Our world. Delaney's voice rose. I was never part of your world. I thought we ran a tech company, Nathaniel. I thought we helped startups scale, that we did consulting work. And we did, Nathaniel interrupted smoothly. We also laundered money, facilitated weapons deals, and occasionally orchestrated the kind of corporate espionage that makes governments nervous. You were part of all of it, Delaney. You just didn't know it. The tactical team member, Lucia, cleared her throat. Mr. Roth, we're on a timeline. Right. Nathaniel set down his glass. Here's what's going to happen. Delaney, you're going to walk out of here with me. We're going to get on a plane to somewhere without extradition treaties and enjoy the $40 million I've been carefully accumulating over the past 5 years. Park, you're going to stay here with Lucia and her team until we're safely airborne, and then they'll let you go. Everyone lives. Everyone moves on. And if I refuse? Delaney asked. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Then Lucia puts a bullet in Park's head. We take you anyway, and you spend the rest of your life knowing that his death was your choice. So really, darling, it's not much of a choice at all. Delaney's mind raced. 3 months ago, she wouldn't have hesitated. She would have done anything to avoid being responsible for someone's death. But 3 months ago, she'd been a different person. 3 months ago, she hadn't spent hours with Jin-Woo, sharing meals and stories and something she'd been afraid to name. 3 months ago, she hadn't learned what it meant to be truly seen by someone. Tell me one thing first, Delaney said, buying time. The debt you left me with, was it ever real? Nathaniel had the grace to look almost apologetic. The $3 million to Park? No, that was fabricated. I needed you desperate enough to accept his help, Needed you close enough to him that when I came back, I'd have leverage. You were always part of the plan, Delaney. My exit strategy. There it was. The final truth. She hadn't been a wife, not really. She'd been a chess piece, carefully positioned for a game she'd never consented to play. Jin-Woo shifted slightly beside her, and Delaney caught the movement, his hand sliding incrementally toward his jacket. She'd seen him make that gesture before, during business meetings that turned hostile. He was armed. But so were the 6 people Nathaniel had brought, their weapons trained and ready. If Jin-Woo tried anything, they'd all die. Unless... Delaney thought about the video Nathaniel had left, the one that had led her here tonight. She thought about the coordinates, the account numbers, the carefully documented evidence of Jin-Woo's organization. Nathaniel had called it an insurance policy, tools to destroy Jin-Woo. But what if it had been the opposite? What if Nathaniel, in his arrogance, had actually given her the tools to destroy him? She needed to make a choice. She needed to make it now. And for the first time in 3 months, maybe for the first time in 5 years, she needed to choose for herself, not out of love or fear or obligation, but out of something purer, rage. Okay, Delaney said softly. I'll go with you. Jin-Woo's head snapped toward her. Delaney. On one condition, she continued, not looking at him, keeping her eyes locked on her dead husband. I want to know why you married me. The real reason. Not because I'm an exit strategy or leverage. Why me specifically? Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. You want the truth? You were perfect. Smart enough to be useful, trusting enough to be blind, beautiful enough to be a convincing cover. And you loved me completely, without question, without doubt. That kind of love is rare, Delaney. It's also incredibly useful. Something inside Delaney, something that had been cracked and bleeding for 3 months, finally shattered completely. And in that destruction, she found clarity. You're right, she said. I did love you completely. Past tense. She turned to Jin-Woo, who was watching her with an intensity that made her bones ache. I'm sorry for what my husband did to your wife. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry for all of it. Then, before anyone could react, Delaney drove her elbow backward into Nathaniel's solar plexus with every ounce of strength her starved frame could muster. It wasn't much. 3 months ago, it would have been even less. But Jin-Woo had made her eat, had made her stronger than she'd been, and the blow was enough to make Nathaniel double over, enough to create a split second of chaos. Jin-Woo moved like lightning, his gun clearing his jacket as he threw himself in front of Delaney. The tactical team reacted instantly, but Jin-Woo was faster, squeezing off 3 shots in rapid succession. Delaney heard Lucia scream, heard the thunder of return fire, felt Jin-Woo's body slam into hers as he drove them both behind the mahogany desk. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder and rain pouring through the broken windows. Are you insane? Jin-Woo shouted over the noise, his body covering hers, protective even in chaos. Probably, Delaney shouted back. But I'm done being a chess piece. More gunfire. Jin-Woo returned it, his movements precise and controlled even in the madness. Delaney heard him speaking rapid Korean into what must have been a concealed radio, calling for backup, she hoped. Nathaniel's voice cut through the chaos, raised but still somehow calm. Delaney, this is foolish. You're going to get yourself killed. She risked a glance around the desk. Nathaniel had taken cover behind the bar, apparently unarmed, letting his hired guns do the work. Of course he was. Nathaniel had always been good at letting other people take the risks. Better dead than yours, she screamed back, surprised by the truth of it. The firefight lasted maybe 90 seconds, but it felt like hours. When it finally stopped, 3 of Nathaniel's team were down, Lucia was clutching a shoulder wound, and the penthouse looked like a war zone. Jin-Woo had taken a graze across his ribs, blood seeping through his white shirt, but he was still standing, still positioned between Delaney and danger. The remaining tactical team members had retreated toward the elevator, dragging their wounded. Nathaniel stood slowly from behind the bar, his hands raised, his expression one of genuine surprise. "Well," he said, "that was unexpected." Jin-Woo's gun never wavered. "You should have stayed dead, Roth." "Probably." Nathaniel's eyes found Delaney, and for just a moment, she saw something that might have been actual regret. "I really did love you, you know. In my way." "Your way is broken," Delaney said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. "And I'm not." Sirens wailed in the distance. Whether Jin-Woo's people or actual police, Delaney couldn't tell. Nathaniel heard them too. He smiled, that same charming smile that had convinced her to marry him, to trust him, to build a life around his lies. "This isn't over, darling." "Yes," Delaney said. "It is." Nathaniel looked at Jin-Woo, then back at Delaney, calculating odds, measuring chances. Then he did what he'd always done best. He ran. He bolted for the emergency stairs, his team scattering after him, leaving behind blood and broken glass and the ruins of whatever plan he'd constructed. Jin-Woo started to pursue, but Delaney caught his arm. "Let him go. He killed my wife." "I know." Delaney's hand tightened on his sleeve, feeling the blood soaking through. "But if you chase him now, you'll bleed out before you catch him." "And her voice cracked. "I can't lose anyone else." Jin-Woo looked down at her, really looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the question he'd been asking since the moment they met, the one neither of them had been brave enough to voice. "What are we doing, Delaney Roth?" She should have had an answer. Should have been able to quantify the complicated mathematics of grief and revenge, debt and obligation, loneliness and connection. But all she could manage was the truth. "I don't know. But whatever it is, I don't want to stop." Those words, her words, an echo of her desperate plea from earlier, but transformed into something else entirely, hung between them as Seoul's emergency lights painted the rain red and blue. Jin-Woo's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't quite not a smile either. "Even though it's messy? Even though it's complicated?" "Especially because it's messy and complicated," Delaney said. "I'm done with things that look perfect on the surface. I want real." "Real," Jin-Woo repeated, testing the word. Then, still bleeding, still surrounded by the wreckage of the night, he did something that stopped her heart more effectively than any of Nathaniel's revelations. He laughed. A real laugh, exhausted and pained and somehow full of life. "You know what? So do I." The elevator doors opened, disgorging a dozen of Jin-Woo's people, all armed, all ready for war. They fanned out across the penthouse, securing the space, calling for medical teams. A woman with kind eyes and efficient hands began treating Jin-Woo's wound, scolding him in Korean that Delaney couldn't understand, but whose tone was universal. Someone handed Delaney a blanket. Someone else brought water. The photograph of Soo-yoon had fallen during the chaos, and Delaney bent to retrieve it, the woman's face smiling up at her from across the divide of death. "Tell me about her," Delaney said quietly, holding the photo out to Jin-Woo. He took it gently, his fingers tracing the edges. "Later," he said. "When we've both stopped bleeding. When things are quieter. I'll tell you everything." "Promise?" "Promise." It wasn't enough. It wasn't closure or justice or any of the things a good story was supposed to provide at this point. But it was real and messy and complicated, and somehow that made it more valuable than any neat resolution could have been. Outside, the rain continued its assault on Seoul. Nathaniel was out there somewhere, planning his next move, nursing his wounded pride, still dangerous. The debt Delaney had been working to pay off had never existed. The man she'd married had never really existed either. Her entire life for the past 5 years had been a carefully constructed lie. But standing in Jin-Woo's destroyed penthouse, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, watching him wince as the medic stitched his side, Delaney felt something she hadn't felt since before the funeral. She felt like herself. Not the perfect wife who made coffee exactly how Nathaniel liked it. Not the grieving widow who'd forgotten how to eat. Not the desperate debtor or the efficient employee or any of the roles she'd been playing. Just Delaney. Starved and furious and alive. And for now, that was enough. The safe house was nothing like Jin-Woo's penthouse. Located in the outskirts of Seoul, tucked between a traditional market and a shuttered textile factory, it was the kind of place that knew how to disappear. The building's exterior was deliberately shabby, peeling paint, cracked concrete, windows covered with yellowed newspapers. But inside, it was a fortress. Reinforced doors, state-of-the-art security, enough weapons to outfit a small army. Delaney sat on a surprisingly comfortable couch, watching dawn break through the one window that wasn't covered. 48 hours had passed since the penthouse. 48 hours of moving from location to location, of Jin-Woo's people sweeping for tracking devices, of debriefing sessions where Delaney had recounted every detail of her marriage to Nathaniel, looking for clues about where he might have gone. They'd found nothing. Nathaniel had vanished as completely as he had when he'd faked his death, leaving behind only questions and a body count. Jin-Woo emerged from the back room where he'd been on a secured call, his wound bandaged but his movements still careful. He'd changed into casual clothes, the first time Delaney had seen him in anything other than a suit, and somehow it made him seem more dangerous, not less. Like he'd shed his civilian camouflage to reveal what he really was underneath. "Coffee?" he asked, heading to the small kitchen. "Please." They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past 2 days, these small domestic gestures existing alongside discussions of murder and revenge. It should have felt absurd, but instead, it felt necessary, proof that they were still human beneath the chaos. Jin-Woo returned with 2 mugs, settling into the chair across from her. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, but his focus was as sharp as ever. "My people tracked Nathaniel to Busan. He boarded a cargo ship registered to a shell company. By the time we got there, the ship was international waters." Delaney wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. "So he's gone. For now." Jin-Woo's tone suggested that "for now" was temporary. But he made a mistake. He showed his face, confirmed he's alive. That changes things. Every law enforcement agency that thought they'd closed his case will reopen it. Every organization he stole from will be looking for him. He paused. "Including mine." He mentioned. "We're tracking it. Nathaniel's good, but he's not better than my financial team. We'll find where he's hidden it, and when we do, we'll find him." Delaney should have felt relief. Should have felt safer knowing that Jin-Woo's considerable resources were focused on hunting Nathaniel down. Instead, she felt restless, like the story wasn't finished and she was still waiting for the next chapter to begin. "You said you'd tell me about her," Delaney said quietly, nodding toward the photograph of Soo-yoon that sat on the coffee table. Jin-Woo had kept it close since the penthouse, and Delaney hadn't asked why. Some questions answered themselves. Jin-Woo followed her gaze, his expression softening in a way she'd never seen before. "Soo-yoon," he said, her name a prayer. "We met in university. She was studying law, I was in business. She knew about my family, knew what I was going to become, and she chose me anyway." He smiled sadly. "She believed she could keep me honest. That if she loved me hard enough, I'd choose a legitimate life. Did you?" "I tried. For 3 years after we married, I ran only the legal side of the business. Did well at it too. But the family had other plans, and there are some obligations you can't escape just because you've fallen in love. He took a sip of coffee, eyes distant with memory. Soo-yoon accepted it. Not happily, but she stayed. She had one rule: no innocent people get hurt. I could deal with criminals, launder their money, facilitate their business. But civilians were off limits. What happened? A client wanted me to move weapons through one of our shipping routes. Legitimate containers on the surface, but hidden compartments underneath. I refused. Too much risk of collateral damage. The client didn't take it well. Threatened to go to my competitors. Threatened to expose some of our operations. Soo-yoon was working as a prosecutor at the time. She got wind of it, started building a case. Jin-Woo's jaw tightened. That's when Nathaniel approached me. Delaney felt her stomach drop. What did he want? Information about the client's operation. Said he was working for a competing organization, wanted to destabilize our mutual problem. In exchange, he'd make sure Soo-yoon's investigation went nowhere. No charges, no exposure. Everyone walks away clean. Jin-Woo set down his mug with deliberate care. I was desperate. Stupid. I gave him what he wanted. And he killed her anyway. 2 weeks later. Made it look like an accident, just like he did with his own death. By the time I realized Nathaniel had played me, that there was no competing organization, and he'd just wanted the client's operation for himself, Soo-yoon was gone. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I've spent 3 years trying to find him, trying to understand why she had to die. Turns out, she didn't. He just needed her out of the way for his larger plan. Delaney thought about Nathaniel's casual confession in the penthouse business, he'd said, as if that made it acceptable. As if human lives were just ledger entries to be balanced or erased according to convenience. I'm sorry, she said, the words inadequate but sincere. I'm so sorry he used me to hurt you again. Jin-Woo looked at her then, really looked at her, and Delaney saw something shift in his expression. You need to understand something. When Nathaniel's debt appeared on my desk, when I saw his name attached to this massive fraud, I didn't care about the money. I cared about finding him, making him pay for Soo-yoon. And then you showed up. His widow. His accomplice, potentially. I didn't know if you were part of his plan or another one of his victims. So I watched you. I made you work for me so I could figure out what you were. Delaney felt a chill despite the coffee's warmth. And what did you decide? That you were the saddest person I'd ever met, Jin-Woo said simply. Sadder even than I was after Soo-yoon died. And I realized that Nathaniel had done to you exactly what he'd done to me. He'd taken someone's capacity for trust, for love, and weaponized it against them. So the meals, the conversations, started as observation, Jin-Woo admitted. I won't lie about that. But they became something else. You became something else. What? Jin-Woo stood, moving to the window, his silhouette dark against the rising sun. A reminder that not everything Nathaniel touches has to stay broken. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Delaney thought about the past 3 months, about the way Jin-Woo had made her eat even when food tasted like ash, about the way he'd listened to her stories like they mattered, about the way he'd positioned his body between her and bullets without hesitation. She thought about the way she'd begged him not to stop, and how those words had meant something different than either of them had initially understood. Can I ask you something? Delaney said. Jin-Woo turned from the window. Anything. Why did you freeze? When I said, don't stop in your office, before everything went to hell. You were reaching for the contract to end our arrangement, and I asked you not to stop, and you just froze. Jin-Woo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard before. Because I realized that if I ended our arrangement, I'd have no legitimate reason to keep seeing you. And the thought of that, of having to let you walk away, made me understand how much I'd come to depend on our evenings together. Depend how? Like they were the only real thing in my day, Jin-Woo said. Everything else is performance, strategy, maintaining the empire. But with you, I could just be Jin-Woo. Not the boss, not the heir, not the widower on a revenge quest. Just a man having dinner with a woman who understood what it meant to lose everything. Delaney stood, crossing to him slowly, her heart hammering. And now? Now that the arrangement is over, now that the debt was fake, now that everything's changed, what are we? Jin-Woo reached out, his fingers gentle as they traced the line of her jaw. I don't know. But I know that when I saw Nathaniel in my penthouse, when I thought he might take you, I understood something. What? That Soo-yoon would want me to live again. Not just survive, not just seek revenge, but actually live. And, somehow, impossibly, you make me want that too. Delaney leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, she saw in Jin-Woo's face the same complicated tangle of emotion she felt. Grief and hope, caution and desire, the past and the impossible potential of a future. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to trust again, how to open myself up to someone after Nathaniel. I don't even know who I am anymore without all his lies shaping me. Then we figure it out together, Jin-Woo said. Slowly. Carefully. Without pretending it's going to be simple or easy or anything other than what it is. Which is two broken people trying to become whole again. Two people who've been used and betrayed, trying to build something that's ours instead of someone else's design. He hesitated. If you want that. I won't push, Delaney. I won't make you choose between me and your freedom. You've had enough of being trapped. Delaney thought about that, about freedom, about choice, about what she wanted instead of what she was expected to want. 3 months ago, freedom would have meant escape, distance, running as far from her old life as possible. Now, standing in Jin-Woo's space, feeling the warmth of his hand against her skin, freedom felt like something different. It felt like the choice to stay. I want to know everything, she said finally. About your work, about Soo-yoon, about what you really do beyond the consulting firm facade. No more secrets, no more protection from the ugly truth. If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need to know who you really are. Even if it's not pretty? Especially if it's not pretty. I'm done with pretty lies. I want messy truth. Jin-Woo smiled then, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. Okay, messy truth it is. He stepped back slightly, his expression becoming more serious. But before we start on my confessions, there's something you should see. He moved to a laptop set up on the dining table, opening a secured folder. My team's been analyzing the video Nathaniel left you, the one with all the information about my organization. And we found something interesting. Delaney joined him, looking at the screen where Nathaniel's face was frozen mid-sentence. What? The metadata. The video wasn't created 2 weeks before his death like the timestamp suggests. It was created 3 days ago. Nathaniel made it after he disappeared, not before. Delaney's blood ran cold. That means he's been watching you this whole time, Jin-Woo finished grimly. Watching us. He knew about our arrangement, about the meals, about everything. The video wasn't insurance he left behind. It was a bomb he planted specifically to drive a wedge between us. But why? If he just wanted me back, why not? Delaney stopped, realization dawning. The 40 million. He needed me to doubt you, to believe you were just using me. Because if I trusted you, if we worked together, we'd find his money, Jin-Woo confirmed. And we'd find him. Nathaniel's greatest skill isn't theft or manipulation. It's understanding people's psychology, using their emotions against them. He wanted you isolated, doubting, too broken to be a threat. Delaney laughed bitterly. He really doesn't know me at all anymore, does he? No, Jin-Woo agreed. He knows the woman you were 5 years ago. He has no idea who you've become. The question echoed in Delaney's mind. Who had she become? 3 months ago, she'd been a ghost, barely eating, barely functioning. Now, despite everything, she felt more alive than she had in years. Angry, yes. Hurt, absolutely. But alive in a way that mattered. So what do we do? She asked. Jin-Woo closed the laptop. We use what Nathaniel doesn't know against him. He thinks you're fragile, thinks you'll break under pressure. He thinks I'm just another criminal who'll betray you eventually. He has no idea that we might actually, Jin-Woo paused, choosing his words carefully, that we might become something stronger together than we ever were apart. Delaney felt warmth bloom in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. You sound pretty confident about that. I am. Because I've watched you take everything Nathaniel threw at you and turn it into fuel. Because I've seen you choose to fight instead of flee. Because Jin-Woo reached out, taking her hand. Because you're magnificent, Delaney Roth. And you don't even know it yet. No one had ever called her magnificent before. Beautiful, yes. Smart, competent, useful. But magnificent? That was new. That was something that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. Before she could respond, before she could process the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, Jin-Woo's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. What is it? Nathaniel made contact. Sent a message through one of his old associates. Jin-Woo turned the phone so Delaney could read the screen. The message was brief, addressed to both of them. Enjoyed our reunion. Let's do it again soon. I'll be in touch when you're ready to negotiate. And Delaney, darling, I always finish what I start. Delaney felt anger flash hot and bright. He thinks this is a negotiation. That's how he sees everything. Life's just one long transaction. Jin-Woo's jaw set. But he's wrong. This isn't business. This is personal. For both of us, Delaney added. They stood there, hands still clasped, staring at Nathaniel's message as the sun continued its rise over Seoul. Somewhere out there, her husband, her supposedly dead husband, was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, the man who'd killed Soo-yoon was plotting how to reclaim the life he'd built on lies. But here, in this safe house, in this moment, Delaney felt something shift into place. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't just Nathaniel's victim or Jin-Woo's employee or anyone's anything except herself. And she was done being anyone's darling. We need to find him before he finds us again, Delaney said, surprised by the steel in her voice. Jin-Woo squeezed her hand. We will. But first, you need to rest. You've barely slept in 2 days. Neither have you. I'm used to it. Well, I'm not used to it, and I'm not leaving you alone to brood and plan revenge without me. So if you're staying up, I'm staying up. We're partners in this now, remember. Jin-Woo studied her face, and Delaney saw the moment he recognized that arguing would be pointless. Partners, he agreed. In hunting Nathaniel, in uncovering his money, in everything, Delaney finished. Whatever that means, whatever it becomes. No more keeping me at arm's length for my own protection. I'm in this completely. Even knowing it might get you killed? Especially knowing that. Because at least if I die, I'll die as myself, making my own choices. That's more than I could say 3 months ago. Jin-Woo's smile was sad and proud, and something else Delaney couldn't quite name. Soo-yoon would have liked you. The statement, unexpected and sincere, made Delaney's throat tight. Yeah. She always said the most dangerous people are the ones who decide they're done being afraid. He released her hand reluctantly. Okay, partner. Let's plan how to destroy your husband. Ex-husband, Delaney corrected firmly. As far as I'm concerned, Nathaniel Roth died at Serpent's Bend. This is just cleaning up his ghost. They moved back to the dining table, spreading out files and photographs, beginning the methodical work of hunting a man who'd spent years learning how to disappear. As they worked, Delaney felt something settle in her chest, purpose, direction, the sense that she was finally moving towards something instead of just away from pain. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. At some point, Jin-Woo ordered food, and they ate without really tasting it, too focused on tracking financial trails and known associates. Delaney's background in business proved invaluable. She understood how Nathaniel thought, how he structured his deceptions, the patterns he favored. Here, she said, pointing to a series of transactions. This shell company in Singapore. Nathaniel used to talk about Singapore, said it was the perfect place to park money because of the banking privacy laws. I never thought much of it at the time, but look at the timing. These transfers happened right before he died. Jin-Woo leaned closer, studying the documents. Their shoulders touched, and neither of them moved away. You're right. This is good, Delaney. This is very good. They followed the thread, chasing numbers across borders and through corporate structures designed to obscure. And slowly, painfully, they began to unravel Nathaniel's careful work. By the time night fell again, they had a location, a private island off the coast of Malaysia, owned by a corporation that traced back, through 12 layers of subsidiary companies, to Nathaniel's original tech firm. That's where he is, Delaney said with certainty. That's where he'd go. Private island means security, Jin-Woo noted. Means he's dug in, prepared for company. So we'll need to be smarter than expected. Delaney turned to face him fully. Yes, I know you're thinking about leaving me here, somewhere safe, while you handle this. Don't. I need to face him, Jin-Woo. I need him to see that I'm not his darling anymore, that I'm not his anything. I need that closure. Jin-Woo was quiet for a long moment, and Delaney could see the internal battle playing out across his features, the instinct to protect versus the respect for her agency. Finally, he nodded. We do this together. But we do it smart, not reckless. Agreed. Agreed. They shook on it, the gesture almost formal, sealing the pact between them. Then Jin-Woo did something unexpected. He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and steady around her fragile frame. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. For what? For trusting me. For choosing to stay. For being brave when it would be easier to run. Delaney let herself sink into the embrace, let herself feel held and supported and valued for the first time in longer than she could remember. Thank you for making me eat dinner, she said, the words light but meaning running deeper. For seeing me when I felt invisible. For being real when everything else was fake. They stayed like that for a while, two people who'd lost everything finding something worth fighting for in each other. Outside, Seoul hummed with life, millions of stories unfolding in the dark. But in the safe house, Delaney Roth and Jin-Woo Park stood together, planning their next move, building something fragile and new from the wreckage of their pasts. And for the first time since Nathaniel's car had gone off Serpent's Bend, Delaney thought about the future not with dread, but with something that felt almost like anticipation. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Whatever came next, she'd face it as herself. And that made all the difference. The flight to Malaysia took 11 hours, during which Delaney slept for maybe 20 minutes, her mind racing with scenarios and possibilities. Jin-Woo sat beside her in the private jet's cabin, outwardly calm, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the armrest in an unconscious rhythm. They weren't alone. Jin-Woo had brought 4 of his most trusted people, the woman who'd treated his wound at the penthouse, whose name was Dr. Yoon, 2 security specialists named Taehyun and Jiwoo, and a tech expert called simply Ghost. who looked about 19 but apparently could hack into anything with a power supply. The island's security is extensive but not insurmountable, Ghost explained, pulling up satellite imagery on a tablet. Nathaniel's got guards, cameras, motion sensors, the works. But there's a blind spot here, he pointed to the western shore, where the rocks make it impossible to build traditional defenses. If we approach by water, stay low, we can get onto the island without triggering alerts. And then? Delaney asked. Then we improvise, Taehyun said with a grin that suggested he enjoyed the improvisation part. Boss, you want him alive? Jin-Woo glanced at Delaney before answering. That's not my decision alone anymore. All eyes turned to Delaney. She felt the weight of it, the question they were really asking. Did she want Nathaniel dead? Did she want revenge measured in blood, in finality, in the kind of justice that couldn't be undone? 3 months ago, the answer would have been an immediate no. Delaney had never been violent, never even particularly angry. She'd been the peacekeeper, the problem solver, the woman who believed conflicts could be resolved through conversation and compromise. But 3 months ago, she hadn't known what it felt like to be treated as a chess piece in someone else's game. I want him to answer for what he's done, Delaney said carefully. To me, to Soo-yeon, to everyone he's hurt. I want him to face consequences. But I want those consequences to be real, legal prosecution, exposure, his empire dismantled. Not just a bullet in the dark. She paused. Though I reserve the right to change my mind if he tries to kill us again. Taehyun's grin widened. I like her, boss. Everyone likes her, Jin-Woo said quietly, his eyes on Delaney. She's easy to like. The comment felt weighted with meaning beyond the words. Delaney felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she turned back to the satellite images to hide her reaction. So we get onto the island. We locate Nathaniel, and we do what exactly? Ask him politely to come with us. We use leverage, Jin-Woo said. The one thing Nathaniel cares about more than his own safety. Which is his money. Ghost has already begun the process of freezing his accounts, rerouting his funds, essentially erasing his financial existence. By the time we reach him, Nathaniel will be a man without resources, which makes him a man without options. Ghost looked up from his tablet. Already got control of the Singapore accounts. The Malaysia holdings will take another few hours, but I'll have them before we land. Delaney watched the young hacker work, his fingers flying across multiple screens, and felt a surge of something that might have been hope. He's going to be furious. Good, Jin-Woo said. Angry people make mistakes. The rest of the flight was spent preparing. Dr. Yoon checked everyone's medical supplies. Taehyun and Ji-woo reviewed their approach routes, discussing contingencies in a mixture of Korean and English. Ghost continued his digital warfare against Nathaniel's financial network, occasionally muttering victoriously in code. And Delaney sat with Jin-Woo, going over what they knew about Nathaniel's island, about his habits, about the ways he thought and moved and planned. He'll have an escape route, Delaney said. Nathaniel always has a backup plan. When we lived in the Hamptons, he had 3 different emergency exits from the house, each leading to a different vehicle with cash and fake IDs. He's paranoid about being trapped. Then we'll need to close those exits before we confront him, Jin-Woo said. He reached out, covering her hand with his. You okay? You're shaking. Delaney looked down at their joined hands, realizing he was right. A fine tremor ran through her fingers, adrenaline and fear and anticipation mixing into a cocktail her body didn't know how to process. I keep thinking about seeing him again. About what I'll say. You don't have to say anything. You don't owe him words. But I want to. I want him to know. She struggled to articulate the feeling. I want him to know that he didn't break me. That despite everything, I'm still here, still whole, still capable of being more than his victim. Jin-Woo's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the gesture unconsciously soothing. He already knows. Why else would he be so desperate to get you back? Men like Nathaniel, they measure their success by what they can control. You becoming uncontrollable is the ultimate failure for him. Good, Delaney said, echoing Jin-Woo's earlier sentiment. Let him fail. They landed in Kuala Lumpur as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A local contact met them with vehicles and equipment. No questions asked, the kind of arrangement that reminded Delaney exactly what kind of organization Jin-Woo ran. Not all-white-collar consulting, not by a long shot. But she'd asked for truth, and truth meant accepting all of who Jin-Woo was, not just the parts that were easy to reconcile. The drive to the coast took 2 hours through increasingly rural terrain. They stopped at a small marina where a speedboat waited, dark and sleek and built for speed over comfort. As they loaded equipment, Delaney caught sight of her reflection in the boat's windshield and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back had color in her cheeks for the first time in months, courtesy of the meals Jin-Woo had insisted on. Her eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there before, a focus born from purpose. She was still too thin, still carrying the physical evidence of her grief, but she looked alive. She looked dangerous. She looked like someone Nathaniel wouldn't know how to handle. Ready? Jin-Woo appeared beside her, already wearing tactical gear that made him look less like a businessman and more like exactly what he was, a man who'd built an empire through force and will. Ready, Delaney confirmed. The boat cut through the dark water, running without lights, navigating by GPS and ghost-hacked satellite imagery. The island appeared first as a darker shadow against the night sky, then gradually revealed itself. White beaches, dense jungle, and at the center, a sprawling compound that looked more like a resort than a hideout. Typical Nathaniel, Delaney muttered. Even on the run, he needs luxury. They beached the boat at the rocky western shore Ghost had identified, pulling it into a natural cave to hide it from any aerial surveillance. Then began the careful climb up the cliff face, using equipment and expertise that suggested Jin-Woo's team had done this kind of thing before. Delaney, who'd never climbed anything more challenging than the stairs to her apartment, struggled to keep up. But Taehyun moved beside her, patient and encouraging, occasionally boosting her over the difficult parts. At the top, they regrouped in the jungle undergrowth. Ghost pulled out a small drone, sending it up for reconnaissance. The feed showed guards patrolling the compound's perimeter, but their patterns were predictable, lazy even. Nathaniel hadn't expected anyone to find him this quickly. 6 guards visible, probably more inside, Ghost reported. 2 vehicles in the garage, both with engines running. He's ready to bolt. Not before we get there, Jin-Woo said. He turned to his team. Taehyun, Ji-woo, handle the perimeter. Dr. Yoon, stay here with Ghost and monitor communications. Delaney and I will approach the main building. Boss, Ji-woo said carefully, are you sure you want to bring her into direct confrontation? I'm sure I want to stop talking about her like she's not standing right here, Delaney interjected. And yes, I'm coming. This is my fight too. Ji-woo had the grace to look chagrined. Understood. Just be careful, both of you. They moved through the jungle like shadows, Jin-Woo's training evident in every silent step. Delaney did her best to match him, hyper-aware of every twig that might snap, every leaf that might rustle. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain the guards would hear it. But they reached the compound's wall without incident. Taehyun and Ji-woo peeled off to handle the perimeter guards while Jin-Woo led Delaney through a service entrance Ghost had unlocked remotely. Inside, the compound was all marble floors and modern art, the kind of aesthetic Nathaniel had always favored, expensive but soulless. Voices drifted from somewhere deeper in the building. Nathaniel's voice, relaxed and confident, talking to someone about market projections and investment opportunities as if he were still the legitimate businessman he'd pretended to be. Jin-Woo touched Delaney's arm, pointing toward the sound. She nodded, and together they crept forward, following the voice to what appeared to be a home office. Through the partially open door, Delaney could see Nathaniel at his desk, phone to his ear, completely unaware of the reckoning approaching. Jin-Woo made a hand signal, wait. They held position, listening, as Nathaniel wrapped up his call. No, I understand the timeline, Nathaniel was saying. Yes, the funds will be transferred as discussed. I have everything under control. A pause. My wife? That's handled. Trust me, she'll come around. Delaney always does. The casual certainty in his voice, the assumption that she was still his to manipulate, made Delaney's blood boil. She moved before Jin-Woo could stop her, pushing through the door into the office. Nathaniel looked up, startled, the phone still in his hand. For a moment, they stared at each other across the pristine desk, husband and wife, predator and prey, though which was which had changed. Hello, Nathaniel, Delaney said, proud of how steady her voice remained. We need to talk. Nathaniel's surprise melted into that familiar smile, the one that used to make her feel cherished. Delaney, I knew you'd come. I knew you couldn't stay away. Jin-Woo entered behind her, gun drawn but pointed at the floor. She didn't come for you, Roth. She came for answers. Nathaniel's eyes flickered to Jin-Woo, then back to Delaney, assessing, calculating. And you brought your new protector. How quickly you've replaced me. I didn't replace you, Delaney said. I replaced the lie I thought you were with the truth of what I need. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, you've just traded one criminal for another. At least with me, you had the illusion of legitimacy. At least with Jin-Woo, I have honesty, Delaney countered. He's never pretended to be something he's not. He's never faked his death to escape consequences. He's never killed innocent people for business. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Soo-yoon wasn't innocent. She was actively trying to destroy my operation. She was doing her job, Jin-Woo said, his voice deadly quiet. She was protecting civilians from weapons deals that would have gotten people killed. And you murdered her for it. I eliminated a threat, Nathaniel corrected. Just like you've eliminated threats, Park. Don't pretend you're morally superior just because your wife fell in love with you. The jab hit its mark. Delaney saw Jin-Woo flinch, saw the pain flash across his face. But before he could respond, she stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. This isn't about moral superiority, she said to Nathaniel. This is about accountability. You've spent years manipulating people, stealing from them, killing them, all while hiding behind a facade of respectability. That ends now. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed despite the gun in the room, despite the collapse of his plans. And how exactly do you plan to end it, darling? Turn me over to the authorities? With what evidence? Your word against mine? Good luck making that stick. We have your files, Delaney said. Every account, every transaction, every person you've stolen from or killed. Ghost has been very thorough. For the first time, real concern flickered across Nathaniel's face. You've been in my financial systems? We've been everywhere, Jin-Woo said with satisfaction. Your Singapore accounts? Frozen. Your Malaysia holdings? Seized. The $40 million you've been planning to retire on? Redistributed to your victims. You're broke, Roth. And you're done. Nathaniel stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. You can't do this. Those accounts are protected, layered through corporations that goes dismantled in about 4 hours, Delaney finished. You taught me to understand financial structures, Nathaniel. Did you really think I wouldn't use that education against you? The look on Nathaniel's face, shock, betrayal, rage would have been satisfying if it wasn't also terrifying. This was a man who'd killed to protect his interests, who'd faked his death to escape consequences, who'd built an entire life on manipulation and control. This was a man with nothing left to lose. "You know what I love about you, Delaney?" Nathaniel said, his voice conversational but his eyes cold. "Your predictability. I knew you'd come here. I knew you'd bring Park. I knew you'd think you'd won." He smiled. "I've been prepared for this since the moment I sent that message." Before either Delaney or Jin-Woo could react, Nathaniel pulled a gun from under his desk, aiming it not at them but at the floor. He fired twice, and Delaney heard a scream, Dr. Yoon's scream, coming from somewhere below them. "The basement," Nathaniel explained calmly. "Where I've been keeping your team since they arrived. Did you really think I didn't have surveillance on every approach to this island? That I wouldn't know you were coming?" Jin-Woo's gun came up, trained on Nathaniel's chest. "If you've hurt them, they're alive. For now. Which they'll stay as long as you cooperate. Here's what's going to happen." Nathaniel's gun swung toward Delaney, and her breath caught. "Park, you're going to put your weapon down. Then you're going to transfer back all the funds you stole from my accounts. And Delaney, you're going to come with me, just like I planned from the beginning." "And if we refuse?" Delaney asked, proud that her voice didn't shake despite the gun pointed at her heart. "Then I start killing. What about the 40 million your friends, starting with the doctor, and work my way through until you change your mind?" Nathaniel's expression was pleasant, almost friendly. "Your choice, darling. Save them or condemn them. What's it going to be?" Delaney looked at Jin-Woo, saw the calculation in his eyes, the terrible math of impossible choices. She thought about Dr. Yoon, who'd been nothing but kind. About Ghost, barely more than a kid. About Taehyun and Ji-Woo, who'd helped her climb the cliff. She thought about Jin-Woo, who'd made her eat dinner and listen to her stories and choose to keep living. And she thought about the woman she'd become over the past 3 months, not Nathaniel's darling, not Jin-Woo's project, but herself. Delaney Roth, who'd survived grief and betrayal and starvation, who'd chosen to fight instead of flee. That woman wouldn't trade her freedom for anyone's safety, no matter how much she cared about them. That woman had another play. "Okay," Delaney said, raising her hands in surrender. "Okay, Nathaniel. You win. I'll go with you." Delaney, no, Jin-Woo started, but she cut him off with a look. "It's fine. He's right, this is my choice. I won't let people die because of me." She took a step toward Nathaniel, then another, her hands still raised. "But before I go, I need to know one thing." "What's that?" Nathaniel asked, his guard still up, but his curiosity piqued. Delaney took another step, close enough now that she could see the individual threads in Nathaniel's expensive shirt. "Did you ever actually love me? Even a little? Or was it all just strategy from the beginning?" Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a crack in the armor. "Delaney, because I loved you," she continued, her voice breaking authentically. "I loved you completely. And I just need to know if any of it was real." Nathaniel's gun lowered fractionally, his attention fully on her face. Delaney struck. She'd never been athletic, had never studied self-defense beyond the single class Jin-Woo had insisted she take after the penthouse shootout. But she'd been paying attention, had learned where the vulnerable points were. She drove her palm upward into Nathaniel's nose, felt the satisfying crunch of cartilage. As he stumbled backward, blood streaming, she grabbed his gun wrist, twisting exactly the way Jin-Woo's instructor had demonstrated. The gun clattered to the floor. Jin-Woo moved instantly, covering the distance and kicking the weapon away. Nathaniel, clutching his bleeding nose, tried to run, but Delaney stuck out her foot and sent him sprawling. "The basement," she gasped to Jin-Woo. "He was lying about the team being down there." You heard Dr. Yoon scream, but it came from outside, through the windows. He just wanted to make us think. I know, Jin-Woo said, training his gun on Nathaniel. I know. Good work. Taehyun's voice crackled through their earpieces. Perimeter secure, boss. All guards neutralized. We're coming in. Within minutes, Jin-Woo's team had swept the compound, confirming what Delaney had guessed. Nathaniel had been alone, his story about capturing the team a desperate bluff. They found the audio equipment he'd used to fake Dr. Yoon's scream, found the surveillance footage showing their approach, found evidence that Nathaniel had indeed been prepared for their arrival. Just not prepared enough for Delaney to fight back. Now Nathaniel sat zip-tied to his expensive desk chair, blood drying on his face. His expression cycled between rage and disbelief. Delaney stood in front of him, flanked by Jin-Woo, feeling something that might have been triumph or might have been simply exhaustion. You broke my nose, Nathaniel said, the words muffled by swelling. You killed your wife, Delaney replied. And framed Jin-Woo's wife. And destroyed countless lives. I think you'll survive a broken nose. I didn't kill you, Nathaniel pointed out. I faked my death, but I didn't take you with me. That counts for something. It counts for nothing, Jin-Woo said flatly. You left her to deal with your debts, to be terrorized by your creditors. You used her as bait in your games. That's worse than killing her. That's torture. Nathaniel looked between them, and Delaney saw the moment he finally understood that he'd lost, completely and irreversibly. So what now? You kill me? Turn me in? Make me disappear? Delaney thought about it. She had that power now, standing here with Jin-Woo's support and resources. She could choose revenge in any form she wanted. But revenge, she was learning, wasn't always about destruction. Now, Delaney said, you answer for everything. We've already contacted Interpol, the FBI, the Seoul prosecutor's office. They're all very interested in talking to you about fraud, money laundering, and murder. Especially murder. You'll never make it stick, Nathaniel insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. We will, Ghost said, appearing in the doorway with a laptop. Because I've been recording this entire conversation. And because we have your files, your communications, everything. You're done, Mr. Roth. Nathaniel slumped in the chair, the fight draining out of him. For the first time since Delaney had known him, he looked small. I really did love you, he said quietly, looking at Delaney. In the beginning. Before it became about the plan, about the money. Those first few months, I loved you. Delaney felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of letting go of the last illusion she'd been holding onto. Maybe you did. But your love was a transaction, Nathaniel. And I deserve more than that. She turned to Jin-Woo, who'd been watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. I deserve real. Jin-Woo's smile was soft, understanding, full of promise. Yes, you do. The authorities arrived at dawn, multiple agencies descending on the island with warrants and evidence bags and the weight of justice that had been delayed but never denied. Delaney gave her statement, handed over the files, explained everything she knew about Nathaniel's operation. And then, finally, she walked away. Jin-Woo waited for her on the beach, watching the sun rise over the ocean. When he saw her, he held out his hand, and she took it without hesitation. It's over, she said. This chapter is, Jin-Woo agreed. But I think the story's just beginning. Delaney leaned into him, letting herself be held, letting herself feel safe and valued and seen. Somewhere behind them, Nathaniel was being loaded into a helicopter, bound for extradition and trial. Somewhere ahead of them, questions remained about what they were to each other, about how two broken people built something whole. But for now, in this moment, Delaney Roth simply stood on a beach in Malaysia with a man who made her want to keep living, and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt free. 6 months later, Seoul bloomed with spring, the cherry blossoms painting the city in shades of pink and white. Delaney stood at the window of Jin-Woo's, their apartment, watching petals drift past like snow, and marveled at how different the view looked now compared to that rainy night when everything had changed. The apartment wasn't the penthouse that had been thoroughly destroyed in the shootout and held too many ghosts anyway. This place was smaller, warmer, with windows that opened to let in the city's sounds, and a kitchen where Delaney had learned to make Korean dishes under the patient instruction of Jin-Woo's aunt. Healing, she learned, happened in small moments. In learning to cook without burning garlic. In managing to sleep through the night without nightmares. In reading the news about Nathaniel's trial without feeling her chest constrict with panic. The trial had been spectacular in the way disasters are spectacular, front-page news for weeks as prosecutors unveiled the full scope of Nathaniel's crimes. Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, actual murder. The evidence had been overwhelming, the verdict never really in doubt. Nathaniel Roth was serving multiple life sentences in a federal prison with no possibility of parole. His appeals had been denied. His assets had been seized and distributed to his victims. His name had become synonymous with corporate fraud and criminal manipulation. He'd gotten exactly what he deserved. So why did Delaney sometimes wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, still hearing his voice calling her darling? "You're thinking about him again," Jin-Woo said, emerging from the bedroom with his tie half knotted. 6 months together, and he could read her moods with uncanny accuracy. "How do you know?" "You get this look. Distant. Like you're watching something that happened to someone else." Jin-Woo crossed to her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "What is it this time?" Delaney leaned back against him, grateful for the solid warmth of his presence. "I was thinking about how he's in prison, completely defeated, facing consequences for everything he did. And I should feel satisfied, right? Justice served, happy ending, all that. But sometimes I still hear his voice in my head, still feel like I'm that woman who believed his lies. And I hate that he still has that power, even from a prison cell." She turned to face Jin-Woo. "Does it ever get easier? Did it get easier for you with Soo-yoon?" Jin-Woo considered the question seriously, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Yes and no. The acute grief fades, the anger becomes something you can live with rather than something that consumes you. But the loss? The awareness that she should be here and isn't? That doesn't go away. It just becomes part of who you are." "That's not very encouraging." "No, but it's honest." Jin-Woo's fingers traced along her jaw, gentle and reverent. "The difference is that now you're not facing it alone. Now you have people who see you, who value you, who want to help carry the weight. People like you? Especially like me." Delaney smiled despite the melancholy threading through her. "You know, 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be living with a Korean Mafia boss, learning to cook kimchi, and actually happy, I would have thought they were insane. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd fall in love again, I would have had them removed from my organization," Jin-Woo replied with a slight smile. "And yet here we are." The L word hung between them, deliberate and significant. They'd danced around it for months, both of them too scarred by the past to rush into declarations. But lately, it had become harder to deny what they'd built together. Love. Delaney tested the word. "Is that what this is? What else would you call it? Convenience? Mutual trauma bonding? Extremely complicated employment?" Delaney laughed, the sound genuine and full. "When you put it that way, love sounds much simpler." "It is simple," Jin-Woo said. "I love you, Delaney Roth. I love your strength, your resilience, the way you broke your husband's nose even though you were terrified. I love that you make me eat vegetables even though I hate them. I love," he paused, searching for words. I love who I am when I'm with you. More human, less monster. You're not a monster. I've done monstrous things. So have I, Delaney countered. I enabled Nathaniel's crimes even if I didn't know it. I profited from his fraud. I'm not innocent in all this. You were a victim. And so were you, Delaney said fiercely. Nathaniel killed Soo-yoon. He manipulated both of us. We're both victims, and we're both survivors, and we both deserve to move forward without carrying guilt that isn't ours. Jin-Woo studied her face, and she saw in his expression the same wonder she felt that they'd found each other in the wreckage, that they'd chosen to build something new instead of staying trapped in grief. I love you too, Delaney said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I don't know if I'm supposed to love this quickly after Nathaniel, if I'm supposed to wait for some arbitrary amount of time before my feelings are valid. But I do. I love you. Jin-Woo kissed her then, slow and sweet, tasting like coffee and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. So what now? Delaney asked. We've defeated the villain, recovered the money, gotten justice. What's the next chapter? Well, Jin-Woo said, reaching into his pocket. I was thinking we might write it together. Officially. He held out a small box, velvet and clearly containing jewelry. Delaney's heart stuttered. Jin-Woo. It's not what you think, he said quickly. I'm not proposing. Not yet. You're still technically married to Nathaniel until the divorce is finalized, and I'm not an idiot. Then what? Jin-Woo opened the box, revealing a delicate necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a cherry blossom. This was Soo-yoon's. She wore it every day. After she died, I couldn't look at it, couldn't touch it. But lately, I've been thinking she'd want someone to wear it, someone who understood what it meant to survive despite everything. Delaney's eyes filled with tears. I can't take this. It's too important, too personal. Which is why I want you to have it, Jin-Woo interrupted. Soo-yoon believed in new beginnings, in forgiveness, in building something beautiful from broken pieces. You embody everything she valued. And I think, his voice caught slightly. I think she'd be happy knowing you're wearing it. Knowing I'm moving forward. With trembling fingers, Delaney lifted the necklace from the box. The pendant caught the light, delicate, and perfect. Help me put it on? Jin-Woo fastened the clasp, his fingers gentle against her neck. Delaney caught her reflection in the window, a woman who'd been starved and broken, now healthy and whole, wearing a dead woman's necklace and a living man's love. Thank you, she whispered, for trusting me with this. For trusting me with your heart. Thank you for putting it back together, Jin-Woo replied. A phone buzzed, Jin-Woo's work phone, the one that only rang for important business. He checked it, his expression shifting to something more focused. I have to go into the office. There's a situation with one of our shipping contracts. The legal shipping contracts or the other kind? Does it matter? Delaney thought about it. 6 months ago, the answer would have been yes, absolutely. The distinction between legal and illegal had been everything. Now she understood that Jin-Woo existed in shades of gray, that he ran an empire built on both legitimate business and criminal enterprise, and that she'd chosen to be with him anyway. No, she said finally. It doesn't matter. But be safe, okay? Always. Jin-Woo kissed her forehead. Oh, I almost forgot. There's a letter for you on the counter. It arrived this morning. After Jin-Woo left, Delaney found the letter, thick cream paper, expensive, with her name written in elegant script. No return address. Her stomach clenched with old fear, wondering if somehow Nathaniel had found a way to reach her even from prison. But when she opened it, the signature at the bottom made her breath catch. Soo-yoon's mother. Dear Ms. Roth, I hope this letter finds you well. My son-in-law informed me of your relationship, and I wanted to write to you personally. When Soo-yoon died, I thought Jin-Woo would never recover. I watched him become colder, harder, more consumed by revenge than by living. I grieved not just for my daughter, but for the man she loved, who seemed to be dying by degrees even though his heart kept beating. But lately, Jin-Woo has changed. He smiles. He visits me without being prompted. He talks about the future instead of living in the past. And when he speaks of you, his entire face transforms. I wanted you to know that I am grateful. Grateful that you've helped him find his way back to himself. Grateful that you've given him permission to move forward without forgetting Soo-yoon. Grateful that you exist. I would very much like to meet you if you're willing. Perhaps for tea, when your schedule allows. With sincere appreciation. Park Min-ji. Delaney read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed this, permission from Soo-yoon's mother to be happy with Jin-Woo, acknowledgement that loving him didn't mean disrespecting the woman who'd loved him first. She texted Jin-Woo immediately. Your mother-in-law wrote to me. Can we have tea with her this week? His response came quickly. She'd love that. So would I. And Delaney? She's not my mother-in-law anymore. She's just family. And what am I? You're everything. Delaney set down her phone, touching the cherry blossom pendant at her throat. 6 months ago, she'd been a widow drowning in debt and grief. 3 months ago, she'd been fighting for her life against a husband who should have been dead. Now, she was a woman learning to cook Korean food, falling in love with a complicated man, and building a family from the pieces of broken ones. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't even the life she'd have chosen, given the pain required to get here. But it was hers. Really, truly hers. The doorbell rang, interrupting her reflection. Delaney wasn't expecting anyone, and security was tight enough that random visitors couldn't reach their floor. Cautious, she checked the camera feed. A woman stood in the hallway, young and professional, holding a briefcase. She looked up at the camera and smiled. Ms. Roth? My name is Kara Mills. I'm an attorney representing the victims of Nathaniel Roth's fraud. I have some papers that require your signature. Delaney opened the door, inviting the lawyer inside. Kara Mills was all business, spreading documents across the dining table with practiced efficiency. As you know, Nathaniel's assets have been seized and are being distributed to his victims. However, there are some complications regarding assets that were technically in your name during the marriage. Delaney's stomach sank. I didn't know about any of his crimes. I've already given statements. I know, and you're not in any legal trouble, Kara assured her. But there are decisions you need to make about how certain assets are distributed. Properties, investments, some artwork. Legally, you have a claim to half of everything acquired during the marriage. I don't want anything from Nathaniel. I understand the sentiment, but I'd encourage you to think carefully. We're talking about potentially millions of dollars that could be used to rebuild your life, to help other victims, to fund whatever matters to you. Kara pulled out a specific document. For instance, Nathaniel owned a tech startup incubator in Vermont, your home state. It's currently dormant, but it could be revived to help young entrepreneurs who don't have access to traditional funding. Delaney looked at the papers, thinking about how Nathaniel had corrupted everything he touched, how his wealth was built on others' suffering. Could it be used to help women leaving abusive situations? Specifically economic abuse. Kara's expression softened. Absolutely. You could establish a foundation, fund programs, create real change. Turn Nathaniel's ill-gotten gains into something that helps people he would have exploited. The idea settled into Delaney's chest, warm and right. She wouldn't take Nathaniel's money for herself, but she could use it to undo some of the harm he'd caused. She could build something good from the wreckage he'd left. I'll do it, Delaney said. All of it. Every asset I have a legal claim to, I want directed toward helping his victims and preventing future victims. Kara smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll draw up the paperwork. They spent the next hour going through documents, Delaney signing away her claim to properties and investments, directing funds toward the Victims' Compensation Fund, establishing the framework for a foundation that would help women rebuild after economic abuse. It felt good. It felt like taking back power, like transforming pain into purpose. After Kara left, Delaney called Jin-Woo. I'm starting a foundation. Of course you are, he said, warmth evident in his voice. What kind of foundation? She told him about the plan, about using Nathaniel's seized assets to help women escaping economic abuse. Jin-Woo listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Soo-yeon would have loved this, he said finally. She was always looking for ways to help people the system overlooked. Will you help me? Not financially, I know you support other causes. But advice, connections, that kind of thing. Delaney, I'll help you with anything you want. But can I make a suggestion? Of course. Name it after Soo-yeon. The Park Soo-yeon Foundation for Economic Justice. She deserves to be remembered for more than how she died. Let her legacy be about helping people. Delaney felt tears well up again. Are you sure? It's your wife, your grief. It's our grief now, Jin-Woo corrected gently. Yours and mine. We carry it together, and we transform it together. Name it after her. Please. The Park Soo-yeon Foundation for Economic Justice. Delaney tested the words. I love it. I love you. The words still made her heart flutter, still felt new enough to be precious. I love you too. Come home soon. As soon as I can. Delaney spent the rest of the afternoon planning, researching similar foundations, reaching out to contacts she'd made through Jin-Woo's network. By the time Jin-Woo returned that evening, she had pages of notes and a fire in her chest that felt like the opposite of the starvation that had nearly killed her. She was hungry for this. Hungry for purpose, for justice, for turning her pain into something that mattered. They ate dinner together, a simple meal that Delaney had cooked without burning anything, which Jin-Woo declared a victory worth celebrating. They talked about the foundation, about Jin-Woo's day, about the small mundane details of life that had become precious in their normalcy. Later, curled together on the couch, Delaney said, I never thought I'd be grateful for what Nathaniel did. But if he hadn't destroyed my life, I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have learned how strong I am. I wouldn't have found this purpose. That's very evolved of you, Jin-Woo said. I'm still just angry he killed Soo-yeon. Anger is okay too. We're allowed to be angry and grateful, broken and healing, all at the same time. Jin-Woo pulled her closer. How did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. He made me eat dinner and listen to stories and believe I was worth saving. You saved yourself, Delaney. I just made sure you didn't starve while you were doing it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Seoul's lights twinkle outside their window. Somewhere in the city, people were living and dying, loving and betraying, just like always. But here, in this apartment, two people who'd lost everything had found something worth keeping. Not perfection. Not a fairy tale ending. Just real, messy, complicated love and the promise that tomorrow would come and they'd face it together. And for Delaney Roth, who'd begged a Mafia boss not to stop and then learned to stand on her own, that was more than enough. It was everything. 1 year later, the Park Soo-yeon Foundation for Economic Justice held its first annual gala at a hotel in downtown Seoul. Delaney stood backstage, smoothing down her emerald green dress, a shade Jin-Woo insisted brought out her eyes, and tried to calm her racing heart. You're going to be brilliant, Dr. Yoon said, appearing beside her with a glass of water. The doctor had become a close friend over the past year, helping Delaney navigate not just Korean culture, but also the complicated world of running a nonprofit with ties to Jin-Woo's organization. "I'm going to throw up," Delaney corrected. "Public speaking was never my thing." "You're speaking from the heart about something you're passionate about. That's all anyone wants to hear." The foundation had exceeded every expectation. In 1 year, they'd helped over 300 women escape economically abusive situations, provided job training and education funding, established a network of safe houses and financial literacy programs. The media had covered it extensively, the widow of a criminal transforming his stolen wealth into a lifeline for others. Nathaniel had hated it, according to the one letter he'd sent her from prison. She'd read it once, laughed at his self-pity, and burned it. His opinions no longer had power over her. 5 minutes, a stage manager called. Delaney took a deep breath, touched the cherry blossom pendant at her throat for luck, and walked toward the stage. The ballroom was packed: donors, volunteers, survivors of economic abuse who'd been helped by the foundation, journalists, and politicians. At a table near the front, Jin-Woo sat with his aunt, both of them dressed formally, both of them smiling at her with unmistakable pride. The applause when Delaney walked on stage was thunderous. She reached the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and felt a calm settle over her. "1.5 years ago, Delaney began, I was a different person. I was a widow drowning in debt I didn't understand, isolated, starving, literally starving myself because I'd lost the will to eat. I was a woman who'd built her entire identity around a man who turned out to be a lie." The room was silent, everyone leaning forward to hear. "I could have let that destroy me. I almost did. But someone made me eat dinner." She smiled at Jin-Woo. "And someone else gave me a purpose bigger than my grief." And slowly, painfully, I began to understand something crucial. Our worth isn't determined by what's been done to us, but by what we choose to do with the pain. Delaney told them about the foundation, about the women they'd helped, about the transformation that happened when someone was given resources and respect instead of judgment and pity. She told them about Soo-yoon, about a woman who'd believed in justice and compassion, whose memory now lived on in every person the foundation helped. "We named this foundation after Park Soo-yoon because she represents everything we stand for: courage, integrity, and the belief that one person can make a difference. Her life was cut short by violence and greed, but her legacy is love and action. And every day, we honor her by helping people who the world has overlooked." The applause was deafening. Delaney saw Jin-Woo stand, his hands coming together with everyone else's, his eyes bright with unshed tears. She saw survivors she'd personally helped, now thriving, now rebuilding. She saw the future she was creating from the ashes of her past. After her speech, the gala continued with dinner and dancing and the business of fundraising. Delaney worked the room, thanking donors, hugging survivors, feeling more herself than she ever had in her marriage to Nathaniel. "You were magnificent," Jin-Woo said when they finally found a moment alone on the balcony overlooking the city. "Soo-yoon would have been so proud." "You think so?" "I know so. And I'm proud too. Of what you've built, of who you've become, of the fact that you chose to turn pain into purpose." He reached into his jacket pocket. "Which brings me to something I've been wanting to ask you." Delaney's heart stuttered. "Jin-Woo, your divorce from Nathaniel was finalized 3 months ago. You're legally free of him, completely and permanently. And I've been waiting, trying to be patient, trying to give you time to heal before I did this." He pulled out a small box, different from the one that had held the necklace, but clearly containing something similar. "But I can't wait anymore." He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band with a single diamond. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not even asking you to wear this ring publicly if you're not ready. I'm just asking, his voice caught. I'm asking if someday, when you're ready, you'd consider becoming my wife. Delaney looked at the ring, then at Jin-Woo, then back at the ring. She thought about all the reasons to say no. It was too soon. She was still healing. Marriage had brought her nothing but pain before. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the complications of building a life with a man who existed in the moral gray zones. Then she thought about dinner every evening for the past year and a half. About Jin-Woo learning to cook her favorite American dishes. About the way he'd held her through nightmares. About how he'd celebrated every milestone with the foundation like it was his own victory. About how he'd taken her to visit Soo-yoon's grave and held her hand while she told a dead woman thank you for loving a man worth loving. Yes, Delaney said. Not someday. Now. Yes, I'll marry you. Jin-Woo blinked. Now? But I thought you'd want time, want to be sure. I am sure. I've been sure for months. I was just waiting for you to ask. Delaney held out her hand. Put the ring on, Jin-Woo Park. Make it official. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger, the right finger this time, not the left hand that still felt haunted by Nathaniel's ring. It fit perfectly, catching the light from the ballroom, a promise made in precious metal. I love you, Jin-Woo said, pulling her close. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, Delaney replied. Love should be a little terrifying. Otherwise, how do you know it's real? They kissed on the balcony while Seoul hummed below them, while the gala continued inside, while the world kept turning in its chaotic way. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing and feeling too much to articulate. Should we tell people tonight? Delaney asked. Make an announcement? Let's keep it to ourselves for a bit. Let's just be engaged without it becoming a news story. Jin-Woo wiped at his eyes. Besides, your moment tonight was about the foundation, about the work. I don't want to overshadow that. It's our foundation, Delaney corrected. Our work. Everything I've built, I built because you gave me the space and support to do it. This is as much your victory as mine. Then let's celebrate it together. Tonight's about the foundation. Tomorrow we can tell everyone we're getting married. They returned to the gala hand in hand, Delaney's new ring hidden against Jin-Woo's palm so no one would see it yet. They danced, they mingled, they basked in the success of a year's hard work. And, through it all, Delaney felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful, the kind of happiness that only exists on the other side of suffering. Later that night, back in their apartment, Delaney stood again at the window watching the city. Jin-Woo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and they stood together in the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need words to communicate. Do you ever think about him? Jin-Woo asked quietly. About Nathaniel, about what he's doing in prison? Sometimes, Delaney admitted. Not as much as I used to. Mostly I just feel sorry for him. Sorry for him? He had everything: wealth, a wife who loved him, opportunities most people never get. And he threw it all away for greed and power. Now he's in a cell alone with nothing but his regrets. That's not the life I'd want for anyone, even him. Jin-Woo was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than I am. I still hope he suffers every day. That's okay too. You lost Soo-yoon because of him. You're allowed to want him to suffer. And you lost yourself because of him. Don't you want him to suffer? Delaney considered the question honestly. I want him to understand what he destroyed. I want him to truly comprehend the pain he caused, the lives he ruined. But suffering for suffering's sake? No, that doesn't heal anything. It doesn't bring back Soo-yoon or give me back those years I spent believing his lies. It just perpetuates the cycle. Jin-Woo pressed a kiss to her temple. How did I get so lucky to find you? You didn't find me. I owed you money, remember? Delaney smiled. A debt that never existed. Best investment I never made, Jin-Woo said. They stood like that for a while longer, watching the city, feeling the weight and wonder of how far they'd come. From that first meeting to the penthouse shootout to this moment, engaged and in love and building a life neither of them had thought possible. Can I ask you something? Delaney said. Anything. That first dinner, when you made me eat. Did you know even then? Did you have any idea we'd end up here? Jin-Woo thought about it. No. I thought you'd work off the debt and disappear from my life, another person briefly intersecting with my world before moving on. I didn't expect, he paused. I didn't expect you to matter. I didn't expect to want you to stay. And now? Now I can't imagine my life without you in it. Now the thought of you leaving makes me understand why people do stupid, reckless things for love. Delaney turned in his arms to face him. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Promise? Promise. They sealed it with a kiss, then with more kisses, then with the kind of intimacy that only exists between two people who've seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. Later, much later, as they lay tangled in sheets and contentment, Jin-Woo said sleepily, I'm glad you didn't stop. Delaney, half asleep herself, smiled. Didn't stop what? Everything. Fighting, healing, becoming who you are now. I'm glad you didn't stop. The echo of her desperate plea from that night in his office transformed into something beautiful. Delaney snuggled closer, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her ear. I'm glad you didn't stop either, she whispered. Didn't stop living after Soo-yoon. Didn't stop looking for justice. Didn't stop opening your heart even when it would have been safer to stay closed. We're quite the pair, Jin-Woo murmured. Two people who should have been destroyed by their pasts, somehow building a future together. Not somehow, Delaney corrected. Because we chose to. Because we decided that the people who hurt us didn't get to write the ending of our stories. And what is the ending of our story? Jin-Woo asked. How does it go? Delaney thought about it, about the foundation, about the ring on her finger, about the man holding her like she was precious. She thought about Nathaniel in prison, about Soo-yoon's memory living on in the work they did, about all the women they'd helped find their own strength. It goes like this, Delaney said. Two broken people met in the worst possible circumstances. They were used and betrayed, starved and grieving, barely holding on. But they chose each other anyway. They chose healing over bitterness, love over revenge, building over destruction. And they lived not happily ever after, because life isn't a fairy tale, but meaningfully ever after. Making a difference, honoring the dead, creating something good from all the bad that came before. I like that ending, Jin-Woo said. Me too. As Delaney drifted off to sleep, she thought about the question that sometimes lingered in the back of her mind. What if she'd never married Nathaniel? What if she'd never been broken, never starved, never stood in Jin-Woo's office begging him not to stop? But the question didn't haunt her anymore. Because yes, the pain had been real and terrible and nearly fatal. But so was the growth, the strength, the love she'd found on the other side. She wouldn't wish her journey on anyone. But she wouldn't trade where it had led her for anything either. Outside, Seoul dreamed its million dreams. Inside, a starved widow who'd begged a mafia boss not to stop, who'd frozen a moment, a life, a heart, slept peacefully beside the man who'd helped her remember how to live. And somewhere in the universe, Soo-yoon's spirit watched over them both, satisfied that her legacy was love and her memory was blessing instead of curse. The story that had begun with death and lies and desperate hunger ended with life and truth and the quiet satisfaction of two people who'd survived the worst and chosen each other anyway. It ended with hope. It ended with love. It ended well. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your location in the comments. Let me know this story reached you. And if it touched your heart, if it made you feel something, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Subscribe. Help me prove that stories about survival and second chances and messy, complicated love matter just as much as the fairy tales. Because Delaney's story is over, but maybe yours is just beginning. Maybe you're the one who needs to hear that it's okay to be broken, that it's okay to start over, that the person you become after surviving is often stronger than the person you were before the world tried to break you. And maybe, just maybe, your ending can be good too. Subscribe if you believe in second chances. Share if you know someone who needs to hear this. Comment with your thoughts. I want to know what this story meant to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for proving that these stories matter.